Hello, everybody. Welcome to this Derek Arden web chat show. Today, I've got all the way from Chicago, Kevin O'Connor, who's an author, a speaker, and a really nice guy. I've learned so much from Kevin. It's been a real pleasure. But before we do that, I just want to give you some tips from the week that we picked up from the chat show, and I hope you'll join us next week. Number one is Godfrey Lancashire, the private detective, told us never to assume anything. Number two, Alison Gross, the physiotherapist, told us to make sure our posture is upright and that we stretch our necks and perhaps stand up every 20 minutes. Gabrielle Gachet talked to us about positive and negative anchors and that we need to be surrounded by positive anchors at the moment when there's all this bad news going on, and get rid of the negative anchors. Also, that music can be a really fantastic anchor to put us in the right frame of mind and the right state. So that's really important. So think about the music that you put on. Kevin O'Connor showed a technique he got from Nido Qubein, which I tried this morning. I was reading a business book, and he said, scan the chapter first for the highlights, then go to the summary, see what you want to look at, and then speed read the chapter. And in fact, I'm sure that if the chapter didn't meet your requirements, then move on. And I actually read business books. I just pick out chapters and read them out of order because that suits me totally. So today, now I'm going to turn to the interview today, and that's with Kevin O'Connor from Chicago. Kevin sent me a huge CV. I don't know quite how he managed to do all that in his short life, but I'm just going to read some of these highlights out to you. As a consultant, Kevin's worked for people all over the world. As a professional speaker, he's been a member of the National Speaking Association, which is basically the global speaking association of the States, which I've been privileged to go to the conference many times. When I first met Kevin, that was in New Orleans in 2004. And as a writer, he's the author of 7 books, and he's actually only sent me one, so I'm pretty disappointed. I'm surprised I've let him on the program. Born in Illinois, married to a Texan, and his sister lives in California and Italy, and he speaks in Romania from time to time. He has lots of frequent flyer miles. Not much use these days, Kevin. I should try and use them quickly or get some cash for them the way things are going. So welcome, Kevin. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the web show. And we look forward to hearing some of your words of wisdom.
So today we're going to talk about audiences and our talk and ourself. And I think the thing to bear in mind is whenever we talk about presenting, we're talking not only about 1 to 100, 1 to 1,000, we're talking about 1 to 1. How do I present myself? One of my professor friends says, be present and have presence. And I think the presence is the important part. So I think the audiences of today, Derek was asking me about this a few days ago. The audiences of today are not the audiences of yesterday, even 1 to 1. They want an experience, not a talk or a speech. I think they want connection, not, quote, motivation. And they want wisdom, which is your wisdom, your processing of your experiences, which becomes your expertise. They don't want a verbal book report, which some speakers do, especially beginning speakers do. They read a book and then they present that. And they want stories. So this is the advantage of practicing one-on-one. Think about what happened to you today when you're out for your walk, what your dog did, what happened yesterday, and think about a story that happened with regard to that. And that can transmit some of the data. So Kendra Hall from the United States teaches how to speak with stories, and she's very good at it. And she told us a year ago that when you tell a story, oxytocin and cortisol are released in your body. Apparently these are two fluids or something in your body, and one of them is responsible for empathy. The other one is responsible for paying attention. And you notice when you start telling a story to somebody, as long as they're interested and you don't go on and on, they kind of look a little more closely to you. Instead of saying, well, I got up this morning and then I did this, then I did that, and then I did this, that can be pretty tiresome. But if you say, when I came into the driveway last night, I noticed the most spectacular sunset. And as I noticed it, I saw a coyote walk across the yard. Now, all of a sudden, they have a visual picture. So one thing to think about whenever you're presenting, even if you're not a professional presenter, even if you're not getting paid, or even if you're just talking to a friend, think about the story relating what you want to talk to them about. And then, of course, pay attention to other people's stories. When it comes to presentations, if somebody asks you to give a talk or something like that, Aristotle told us that it's the self and the talk and the audience that's most important. And I think one of the problems these days that I've noticed is presenters of all stripes and types. They begin with themselves or they begin with the content instead of starting with the audience. It's always about the audience. So yes, we're going to have content. Yes, we might use PowerPoint. Yes, I have to get dressed. I have to look good. But really, we have to get into the mindset of the audience. One way to do that is arrive early for your presentation and sit in the chairs that they are going to be sitting in. Sit in the front row. What's it like here? Sit in the last row. What's it like here? Somebody's going to be sitting behind that pillar over there. What's it going to be like for them? You might even do this on a one-to-one basis. You meet someone in town, if you're allowed to go outside, talking to your spouse or a friend. You want to pay attention to the eyes. How is it that they're engaged with you? A CEO told me 2 days ago, he said, you can tell when the boss is drifting because he's picking up his phone or he's looking at his computer. He said, if he was really engaged with you, he said he'd be looking at you. And he'd be looking at you with interest. So I think that's something we have to be aware of. Sometimes we're aware of our eye contact. We need to be aware of their eye contact with us. And when they start to drift, that's either a time for a story or a question. Time for us to show interest in them. Because as Dale Carnegie said many, many years ago, it's the most popular book among my undergraduate students, How to Win Friends and Influence People. People like to hear their name, and they like to hear that you're interested in them. So any presentation is about the enduring memory that's going to happen after. It's about the experience that they will remember. A student wrote me the other day, and he said, I really enjoyed the class I took from you 2 years ago. He told me what he learned. And I wrote back and I said, we sure had fun, didn't we? And he wrote back immediately and said, that was fun. That was the experience he had. Now, he learned a lot, but I'm not going to write back and say, oh, I learned these 3 things, or I'm glad you did that, and I'm glad you got an A. I'm going to try to relate to the emotional experience that he had. And over, I think people are interested in that. So for example, I'm a professional speaker like Derek, and I give about 80 or 90 talks a year around the country and a little bit in Europe. And my specialty is mostly technical people who've been promoted to lead teams of other technical people. And so when I used to be on airplanes and they said, what do you do for a living? I said, I'm a professional speaker. They would almost always say, oh, you know Tony Robbins? I said, no. And he doesn't know me either. And that's the end of the conversation. They go back to reading their book. I'm hanging out in midair. Then I decided maybe I should be interested in them a little more. So when they say, what do you do for a living? I said, well, you know, have you ever been on a team where somebody on the team got promoted to lead the team, but not necessarily because they were a good leader? One fellow said, that's my team right now. Another fellow said to me once, that's me. Now all of a sudden I'm engaged in a conversation of social equals. It's not important that he knows that I'm a professional speaker. When's the last time any of us are going to hire a professional speaker? However, if we can have a conversation about working with a boss who's been promoted, maybe not for their competence, but because they were the next in line to be the boss. Now that is something interesting. And as a consultant, I'm also looking at that as a possible opportunity to work for them. So if we take the other person approach first in every presentation we do, all of a sudden you're going to notice that you have a lot more opportunities. And so the talk is important. Yourself is important. That's a good thing. But Cobain said, the audience is the value interpreter. They're saying to themselves, Can you help me solve my problem? Is this going to help me? So for example, today, when we're finished today, and someone at home says to you, how was O'Connor's talk? You might say, it was unbelievable. It was fantastic. It was terrific. And I wouldn't blame you if you said that. But you're probably instead going to say, it was blank. And you're going to fill in a word that means your interpretation of the value that we had together. And I can do my best job. You're the one that decides whether it's valuable. My wife is going to ask me today, how was the London talk today? I'm going to say they were blank. That's my interpretation. And every audience member does it, and every audience member is uniquely doing it. They all do it for different reasons at different times. So if you're talking to a bunch of lawyers, or I talk mostly to physicians, I can't just say, well, I'm talking to a bunch of doctors and I know what they're all like, because they're all different. Surgeons are different than pediatricians, and nurses are different too. So when I meet one, I'll say, how did you decide to become a gastroenterologist? See, and then all of a sudden their eyes light up and they remember why they went to medical school in the first place. Fascinating conversation. So over the time that I've worked with nurses, I know that when I meet a nurse, no matter what she's doing, even retired, if she's a CEO of a company, I said, is it true that once a nurse, always a nurse? Every single one of them lights up like a Christmas tree. And they said, exactly, because nurses have a subculture that I am providing a service for everybody. And once a nurse, I'm always a nurse. Sometimes I'll ask doctors, what's the most challenging part of being a surgeon? And I get kind of a head answer. If I say, what's the most frustrating part of being a surgeon? I get a heart answer. And sometimes you will see a little wave of silent tears. They'll say, I don't like losing patients. I always think I could have saved them. That's a big deal. And then what I do is, as they say in the South of the United States, I go hush, I go quiet and just wait and reverence the silence. And then we talk some more. And I learned something about not only this person, but I learned something about the profession as well. So when you have a lawyer or a doctor or a business owner, ask them what that's like. What was it like to go to law school for you? What was med school like? How did you decide? When did you decide? What did you want to be when you grew up? That's a great question. People always have an answer for that. And they say, oh, wow. Yeah, you know what I wanted to be? And then you might say, what do you think prompted that? It's very interesting. And this is something you do one-on-one, and I also do it with my audiences. My audiences are usually about 60 people. Sometimes I have 100, 150. I prefer not to do 10,000. But when I'm walking around in the beginning, this is how I can relax myself if I'm nervous. I go and meet everybody ahead of time. I treat it like a wedding. You know how you used to go from table to table with your spouse and you thank everybody? I do the exact same thing. A friend of mine taught me many years ago. He said, what I do is I go up to people and I say, hi, I'm Kevin. I'm the presenter today. Hey, would you do me a favor? And they all look at you. I said, I'd like you to overreact to my presentation today. They all laugh. And I know I have, that group is now my best buddies in that audience. I know when I look at them or wink at them while I'm presenting, they know what I'm talking about. And I'll do the exact same thing to the next table, the next table. One person said, I bet you say that to everybody. I said, you're pretty smart. I do. And they laughed because they're right. So this is a way for us to calm ourselves, not worry about my PowerPoint, not worry about my presentation. I figured all that out already. But what I want to do is engage them. This morning, for example, said hello to John and Anthony, had a chance to talk a little bit with Derek. That's exactly what I do before I give a presentation. And I think I would recommend that we do that on a regular basis. The other thing that I think is very helpful is to be encouraging to everybody you meet, including your audience members. Tell them what you learned. Tell them something that's important. My dean gave a presentation at graduation last year, my dean at Loyola University in Chicago. These are all people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s that are getting their bachelor's degrees. So they've come back after they've maybe had children or they've been able to get some money together. Usually graduation speeches are inspirational. Sometimes they talk about how good Loyola is. And I'm not going to read her talk. I'm going to read the first few words of every sentence. See if you can think about how you might feel if you were a student graduating. During your time here as students, you've been encouraged by the faculty, but the faculty has been encouraged by you. You inspired us by your courage. You taught us it's never too late to start a new path. You surprised us with your wisdom. You encouraged us along the way. You motivated us. You gratified us. You honored us. Now, you're in the audience, or you're the parent or the child of the person graduating. How can you not be affected by that? Up here and here, the head and the heart. So I think one of the things that, people often say, you're a professional speaker, are you a motivational? Meaning, are you a motivational speaker? Because that's what they think. And I always say, I hope so. But what I really hope is that I'm not motivational. I hope that I'm inspiring action for the person so that they get a sense of what I can now do because of this presentation that I went to. The other thing that I do, a couple of things that might be useful for you if you ever have to give a presentation. I don't have any tables in the room. There's no computers. They only maybe get a small notebook to take some notes on. And within 10 minutes of me beginning my talk, they're in small groups of 3 people each with a focus question. They stay together for 3, 4, 5 minutes, answer the question. I say, what did you learn? I never say, let's report out. That's boring. What did you learn? And then they start talking about what they learned. I say, okay. And I might give another lecture at 10, 12 minutes. Now I want you to get in a new group of 3, but not with the persons you were with before. So by the end of a presentation, if I'm talking to 60 people for a whole day, they will have met about 40 people just by moving around and talking to one another. And in fact, that's the thing, that's the experience. And I think we do a big disservice by letting people sit in these round tables. Because if you get in a table that sucks, you are there all day and it's no fun. But if you keep meeting new people, all of a sudden you start finding commonality. One last thing. Yeah, Derek, can I say one more thing?
Please, Kevin.
Yeah, so my second master's degree is in counseling psychology. It's the psychology of Alfred Adler. Adler was one of 3 great men that founded modern psychology: Freud, Adler, Carl Jung. They got together at a restaurant every month for years. And then, of course, like great men usually do, they split off from one another. Freud went his way, Jung went his way, Adler went his way. I studied Adler. If you ever go back to school and they ask you what's the difference between Freud, Adler, and Jung, here's the answer. Adler got it right. So Adlerians get together every year for a conference. And in the early 70s, we're in Washington, D.C. A famous Adlerian psychiatrist, Nick Ioannidis, gets up in front of all of us. And he says, I'm having a party at my house tonight. I want all of you to come. We looked at each other and said, he just invited 200 people to his house. I hope he told his wife, right? So we go piling into taxi cabs. We go to Nick's house, which looked like Mount Vernon. It was a gorgeous home. This is back when psychiatrists made money. And there's a party going on. So all of us who are psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, educators, students, we go walking into Nick's house, and there's a Greek dancing instructor in the living room. There's a Greek chef in the kitchen making umpa cheese. There's all the quiet people in the library looking at books. There was something going on in every room in the house. We had a blast, but there were other people at the party too that were not part of our group. And word leaked out to all of us who were psychiatrists, psychologists, and counselors. The other people at the party are Nick's patients from the psychiatric unit at the VA hospital. Now, I remember, this is now early 70s, so you have to give me some credit here. I'm at the punch bowl, and I look at the person next to me, and I said, are you one of them, or are you one of us? I couldn't tell the difference. That's exactly what Nick wanted. Adler thought there were 2 things you and I have absolute control over in life: self-esteem and what he called Gemeinschaftsgefühl. It means social interest, my social feeling. The Queen actually referred to it in her speech a couple days ago. She didn't use the German, she used the English. but it's the social connectedness to people. And so if I overemphasize myself, they call that being a jerk. If I underemphasize myself, that's called being pathetic, right? But when it's in harmony, both things, that's mental health. What Nick said is, I want my people to know that when they come to my house, they experience a social feeling with one another. Because he said they're not experiencing that in the hospital. And so when I am presenting, my ultimate goal is for Gemeinschaftsgefühl, which is a social connection, a fellow feeling of people in the group. And when they see each other again, it's not just, did you go to that lecture? When they see each other again, it's, remember that talk we went to? Remember this, remember that. So that's the experience that I think is really important. Okay, Derek.
Kevin, that was fantastic. And I didn't want to stop you, but I wanted to give you a rest and have some of that coffee that you're you're drinking there. I think I should have studied Alfred Adler, actually, and I was listening to that very carefully. I took my my copy that I keep by me of How to Read Friends
there
and
you go.
People.
Absolutely.
I've got several copies. I give it away to people sometimes, but of course, Carnegie really knew what he was talking about, and he talked about putting yourself in the other person's shoes. That's what he did, really. And I was asked a question about selling this morning, which I'll talk about next week. And you know, I wanted to go back and say sales is easy if you make a great first impression. It's not really an issue for closing the sale. And I worked for a bank once who said, we want you to give us sales closing skills. And I said, well, your sales opening skills are terrible, because you came in late, you ignored me, your handshake was a bit dodgy, and you got an old NatWest suit on and a NatWest tie with suit down it, most of them. But I didn't.
It was interesting. I was on the call today with a senior vice president at one of our big pharmaceutical companies, and I'm writing a book, and so I asked him, you know, what's your advice for presenting to executives? And he had a long pause, and he said, whenever you can, don't. Because he said executives are hired to make decisions. And if you pitch something and they don't like it, you won't be able to do it. He said, it's far better to show initiative. He said, I don't want people coming to me all the time. Can I do this? Can I do that? He said, I want them to show initiative. And he said, I think senior executives want that. They're hired to make decisions, but he said, they really don't want to make too many of them. He said, they would rather celebrate your success when you make the right one and help you recover from the ones that you didn't do so well. So he said, you're way better off to beg for forgiveness. And he said, frankly, that's not really going to happen very much because you are an expert in your own right. You don't need me to tell you that you can do what you know you need to do, which I thought was it was just a remarkable insight for me that, and knowing this guy, I know him very well, that's exactly what he does. He gets himself into some trouble once in a while, but not very much. And he's seen by the company as being confident, but not egocentric.
Kevin, I wanted to ask you about, I mean, a presentation is just, every time we meet someone, we're really doing a presentation, aren't we? For the first time at a networking event or whatever it is. So I really wanted to ask you your tips on networking and a networking event. There's lots of people teach networking, but you're there, you don't know anyone, and what do you do then to be most effective?
So there's American Airlines has a special classification for frequent flyers called concierge key. And these are people, we never know how many there are, you don't know how to get it, but it's like the top rung of everything. They pretty much chew your food for you. You get picked up in a limousine at the gate and they drive you to the next gate. It's fantastic. So I had it for a few years, and they invite you to a dinner in Dallas to meet the president and the COO. So I flew down to go to this dinner. It was really just a reception. Now, these are highly successful people, really I mean, I'm not even in their category, except I fly a lot. And I noticed that there was the cool kids table. Did you have a cool kids table in high school when you were secondary school? They were maybe the athletes or the good looking ones or the ones who had girlfriends, and they all talk to each other. And then the rest of us are like somewhere else. So I noticed a bunch of tables, the pilots were there, a bunch of cool kids are talking to each other. And yet here's this poor guy way over in the corner holding his drink, looking around like, why did I even come to this? So I'm an extrovert, so I figure it's time. My job is to go after the lost sheep, right? So I go up to him. Hi, I'm Kevin O'Connor. He looks adoringly at me like, thank God somebody's talking to me. I said, what's your name? I said, what do you do for a living? He said, I own half of California. Great. So then we talk a little bit. Then I bring him over to the cool kids table and I introduce him to the cool kids. When he's integrated, I look over there and there's a woman over there all by herself. Hi, I'm Kevin O'Connor. I'm so-and-so. What do you do? I own Northern California. You know, these are incredibly successful, powerful people. And yet, socially, they feel kind of isolated. So I think part of our job, whether we're an extrovert or an introvert, is in those situations to go out of ourselves and practice Carnegie's prescriptions, which are very easy to do. Meet somebody, and then all you have to do is say, so I founded Microsoft. What do you remember about those very first days in the garage when you founded Microsoft? He'll tell you, and he'll be interested in that. That's way better than what's the greatest problem you're experiencing now. Get personal with them, and you forge what we talked about earlier, Derek, an experience. So they have an experience of you. It's not just, now, sometimes you get into trouble, you meet somebody who doesn't want to talk to you. It's okay, you know, you move on. But we also don't know what's going on with them at that time. Maybe they just had a fight with their spouse. Maybe they made a big mistake at work. We don't know. But I think I've noticed that when I extend my hand, in the old days when you could shake hands, now when I extend my elbow, when you do that, you're going to be met 99% of the time by someone who is grateful for you having taken that move. And then I just ask them about themselves. And it is fascinating to me what people will tell you when, you know, I said to one fellow he's a gastroenterologist, so he does colonoscopies all day long. Why would someone want to do that, right? So I said to him, really? I said, you do, why would you take that as a specialty? And he said, Kevin, he said, I save lives every week. He said, when we find a problem with someone's colon, we do a happy dance in the examining room. We just saved another life. And I said, well, yeah, of course, if you put it that way, I understand. That was his mission, see? So I said, what else about you that's not a doctor? He said, oh, I can sing House of the Rising Sun better than Eric Burton ever did. Really? You know? He said, oh, yeah. So the next day, he was in a seminar with me. The next day, I said, before we start today's class, let's have a little meditation. And I put on Eric Burton's House of the Rising Sun. This guy got up and started singing with the recording. At the end, and he was fabulous, at the end, all the doctors stood up and gave him a standing ovation. He came up to me at the break with a tear in his eye and he said, Kevin, I've never gotten a standing ovation before. And I said, well, you deserved it because it was fantastic. Isn't that interesting? Now, he's going to remember that experience.
Fabulous. Fabulous.
Very cool.
I'm going to unmute now and see what questions we've got for you, Kevin. And your stories are fantastic. I was just leaving school when the House of the Rising Sun was #1 over here on the Decca label, 1966. I was chucked out. I was chucked out early. I just want you to remember it was a lovely summer's day like this, and Fulham was still in the First Division. Others will know what that means, but you won't.
I've just posted my reply as to my memory of House of the Rising Sun.
John was caned for singing House of the Rising Sun.
In the days that you could get caned with a stick. It was on my ass. Did someone? Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry, I've spelled it wrong. Yeah.
Now, when you're, by the way, when you're presenting to a younger audience, which I mostly am these days, almost everybody's younger than I am. I'm not afraid to
as well.
So yeah, I'm not afraid to still play my music. So for example, I almost always play Frank Sinatra as they're coming in because I like Frank Sinatra. It relaxes me. It's an instrumental, but it's all Frank Sinatra music. I pay $1,062 every year for the right to play that music with ASCAP. So, because you don't want to get find, and you want to do the right thing, of course. So I have had 18-year-olds come in and say, "Oh, Mr. O'Connor, my dad loves Frank Sinatra. So do I. Where did you get that recording?" Very interesting. Now, some people try to, if I come in and I'm doing rap music, that's not who I am. I mean, I know about it, I think, but I'm not going to do that to pander to the audience. During a break, usually I'll play the Navy band doing the Four Seasons songs. So we have a Navy band, part of the military. They performed in Washington, D.C. You can see it on YouTube. And so I'll say, come on back when the music is over. Well, nobody leaves because they like the music so much. And it's all these guys in uniform singing Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. So I pepper the talk with those kinds of experiences. So, and people will say to me, "I remember last year you played, can you play that again?" One of my clients says, "You can't give a talk today unless you play the Navy band." Now he's a Navy guy, so but it's very interesting to see what the audience will tell you what you're good at. The audience, even a one-on-one, the audience tells you what they want from you and what they're learning from you. I think it's just fascinating to kind of see how human beings operate.
Brilliant.
You haven't played Tina Turner,
Yeah.
Simply the Best, or
Yeah, some of it's very enduring, yeah.
Another question for Kevin. Paul.
Yeah, Paul.
What cultural differences do you find where you have to adapt and change the way that you might do that in the States?
Yeah. Well, so for example, when I'm in England, I've noticed that I have to be a little less extroverted when I'm networking. So I can get away with it in the United States. I can be excited, stuff like that. But people are a little, I think maybe, I don't know if it's proper, but they're a little less maybe overt. In Romania, when I teach there, they're hungry for learning. It's as if you are bringing the outside world to them. So my contact there, what she does, she believes in having dessert first. So she quite literally, when she goes to the restaurant, she orders the dessert menu first. We eat dessert first, literally. Everybody's happy with sugar. There's not even any alcohol involved. And then we order the regular food. Her kids, of course, love her. And what I learned from her was, in your presentations, give dessert first. Give the best thing that you want them to leave with first. So today what I said to you was, the audience, I think I said this, the audience wants an experience, not a talk, connection, not motivation. They want your wisdom, not a book report. That's dessert. That's the first thing that I want you to hear. It's also, if I was giving a presentation, that's the last thing I would say. So my first slide, if I'm using PowerPoint, is also my last slide. That's better than, "Hey, how you doing today? It's great to be in Surrey," and blah, 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 blah. People find that to be boring. So I think you adapt a little. When I'm in Dubai, of course, I don't shake hands with the women. I put my hand on my chest and I bow. I try to find out as much as I can. I find out what Friday is all about and what Sunday is all about. But I try not to adapt too much. They came to hear me. I don't think they came to hear a false me that pretends to be a Londoner or pretends to be a Dubai citizen. So I'll adjust so that I'm not alienating people. But in the United States, we have the North and the South, as you know. I was speaking in Louisville, Kentucky, which is not deep South, but it's South, and there's an accent. And I was speaking, and somebody came up to me afterwards, and she said, "I'm from Chicago. It is so good to hear somebody talk fast." I said, "Really? Am I talking fast?" She said, "You're talking just like we do up north." But she said, "People down here drive me crazy because they're so slow." Well, what they're doing is their accent is sort of drawn out. So now I will take that and I may slow down a little bit because of that, because she's only one person. She gets me. but the other person's might not. So I think you're cognizant of it, but I also know they know that I'm from the United States, no matter where I am. If I'm in Romania, they know I'm from the United States, and I'm not going to pretend to be Romanian. I will try to adapt, but I'm not going to adopt what they are. I don't know. Does that help?
Whenever I've spoken in the United States, at the end of the presentation, I'll often have people come up and say, "That was great. I just love your accent." And
Yes.
they've never said, "What a great presentation." They
No.
just said, I just love your accent. Keep talking to.
See, I tell Americans, if you speak a second language, if you have an accent, Americans think you're smart because we don't have a second language. My second language is sarcasm. So, but I can't speak French or German or any of that stuff. So when you folks come over and you have that British accent, everybody loves it because it just sounds so smart. They assume that it's related to your intellect, not to your upbringing. Yeah.
Cool. Kevin, this has been fantastic. I think just one last question from me, then I'll turn the recording off, and then we'll get down to the real meaty stuff we want to ask you. But seriously, that's been fantastic. And actually, we've been hanging on to every word. So we might ask you to do this again. And I know you join all of these anyway.
Sure.
Was great. That was fantastic. The question is, TED Talks are 17 minutes. Is that what audience expect now? Really punchy 17 minutes and then on to something else?
Yeah, I've done a couple of TED Talks, and they are now telling you to do it 6 to 8 minutes because people can't pay attention for 17 minutes.
Really?
So they're asking you to do it shorter rather than longer. And the TED Talks are somewhat artificial, I think, because they are of a particular kind of presentation. So if you watch them, they have certain components to them. In fact, there's even a TED Talk about how to give a TED Talk and what words they use in TED Talks, which is pretty funny. So I think I like to speak presentation-wise. I like to speak in lecturettes. And what I mean by that is, you remember the old days when we had component stereo systems? You could buy an amplifier from one company and a speaker from another company, and they weren't connected physically. They were just connected by wire. Well, I think of my talk as, my talks as lecturettes that are components of a talk. I know the first 10 minutes is going to be this. There's a 12-minute one maybe back down here about some other topic. And so I try to get as concise as I can so that I don't go on and on and on and on. One author said, people who go on and on and on should join the support group on and on and on. And I think speakers do the same thing. We get I might even be doing it today. We get very excited about what we're saying, and we're not paying attention to the eyes. And as soon as, by the way, if you start getting that, that's when you put them into small groups. Immediately, the engagement and the emotion of the room will lift immediately. The problem is some speakers say, I better be funnier. I better say something. I better go faster. Just go hush, be quiet, and then put them into small groups of 2 or 3 and let them talk to each other. They absolutely love it. I said to one group once of all doctors, I said, I'd like to get into groups of 3. And I had an older doctor look at me and said, I don't like getting into small groups. I said, neither do I. Get in a small group. And he did it. And as soon as he did, he liked it. So I haven't had tables in my presentation rooms since 1982, I think. So, and when they walk in, they don't like it too much. Where am I going to put my coffee? They say. That's the question. I say, you can put it on the floor. The hotels ask me, what should we do with the tables? I don't care. I just don't want them in my room. And as soon as they understand they're going to be meeting one another, everything is great.
Brilliant, Kevin. That's absolutely fantastic. And I know people can get hold of you through me. Anyone looking at this on YouTube perhaps might want to get hold of you. How do they get hold of you, Kevin?
My email is kevin@kevinoc.com. KEVIN@KEVINOC.com.
Fantastic. And 3 takeaways for me were: put yourself in the other person's shoes, have empathy with them, and ask them what they do. And I think we forget that, don't we? But
We do. We do.
Kevin O'Connor, thank you so much
You're
for
very welcome.
joining the web chat show today.